Welcome back, everybody, to A Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I'd like to introduce Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. She's a podcaster host, and she has her own podcast, and it's called Story Power Podcast. She's also an author. She has a book. It's called The Space Between Time. It actually came out in 2017, but I love stories, and I'd love to find out what the book is about. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lino.
Yeah. Of course. So tell us about your podcasting journey. Why did you decide to do a podcast in the first place?
Yeah, I'm kind of an old person to have a podcast. But I had been teaching theater part-time at the local community college for quite some time. I had a blog. It's called Sage Woman Chronicles, and I started that in 2013. And I had been working on my book for about 7 years. I published it in 2017. And my life is pretty much all about stories. All my degrees have to do with stories. I taught theater, drama, English. And so, it's like like I was telling you when you were on my podcast, I have this little kind of, well, it's mostly a feeling now, but I had this little voice and something kept saying, go do a podcast. Now, I am not the most technologically advanced person. Fortunately, I have a husband who is, but so it was going to take a lot to learn how to do that. And I had been listening to one podcast. It's called What Should I Read Next with Anne Bogle. And she has a guest and they talk about the books that person loves, 3 books they love, 1 they don't. And then Anne gives them some suggestions about 3 books that they might want to read next. Well, I've been listening to that for like 2 or 3 or 4 years and I really loved it. And I just kept getting this little inkling that I needed to start a podcast. And I was like, well, but what is my podcast going to be about? I don't want to talk just about books because I love movie and TV too. And, so excuse me. And so one day it came to me, it needs to be about stories. And then I didn't know what the title was going to be. So it was this process, finally got the story power idea. And then the pandemic hit. And so I had time because I was teaching my acting classes and my other classes online. From home, that I had time to learn how to use GarageBand. I learned how to record. And I was already using Zoom because that's how we were teaching the classes online.
Right.
And so, but I had to learn a lot of other things, and my husband had to help me with a lot of it.
But you have an incredible voice. You didn't do anything to change that, correct? I mean, that's a natural part of you.
Oh, it's incredible. You think my voice?
Oh yeah, you definitely have an incredible voice. Yeah, it's clear, it's crisp, you speak very eloquently, and you definitely can catch an audience attention with your voice. So I think that probably intuitively you knew that at least you had that.
No, I didn't.
Oh,
because even though I had been an actor when I was a lot younger, I don't think I have that great of a voice. I don't know what it is. I don't really like it that much, or at least I didn't. But I do remember when I was in 3rd grade, this happened when I was in 3rd grade. I cannot remember what the question was, but the answer was multiplication. And so I said multiplication, and the teacher stopped and said, oh my gosh, everybody listen to Lucinda say multiplication. She says every single part of the word. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was on your podcast, you speak very clearly and you pronounce like every just what's the word? Not symphonically? Is that the word I'm thinking of?
Yeah, I guess. I
You
don't.
pronounce everything very, very nicely.
Well, my mother was really great at reading out loud.
Oh, no wonder. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so that probably is kind of how I got it. She had a great talent for that, and she would read things like when my dad was preaching, he was a lay minister in the church that I grew up in, they had lay ministers. He would have her read a poem or something because he had dyslexia and reading out loud was really difficult for him. They didn't know that dyslexia wasn't even diagnosed when he was going to school. And he had to drop out of school because his teachers thought he was stupid and stuff. But he taught himself how to read, and he's really smart. And but reading out loud was hard for him. So if he had a special reading or something, he would have my mom read it because she was really talented. And she would not. It wasn't monotone, you know. She had this really great modulation to her voice.
That's actually the way that I would describe your voice. A great modulation. You said it right on.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
You're
much. I
welcome.
will take that compliment.
You're welcome. So, and I love the title too, Story Power. I mean, it's very engaging already.
Yes, well, to me, I grew up where, of course, my dad didn't read so much. Mom was working. They were both working. So they didn't read to us at night very much because my mom didn't have a lot of energy. She grew up in the Depression and she didn't have great nutrition when she was a kid. So that was kind of hard for her. But sometimes she would read to us, and sometimes they would just give us books or encourage us to read, on our own. But my dad wanted to teach us about human nature. And so we would watch the Disney program on Sunday nights when we were really little.
The Mickey
And
Mouse Club.
yes, there was that too. And sometimes they'd have a movie or they'd have a Disney documentary about animals or
Oh,
something.
okay, cool.
And now you look at them and they're like, oh, these are kind of weird. But, in the 60s and the 70s, it was fine. And so, but my dad was really great about asking all kinds of great questions to get us to think critically about why we liked or didn't like the thing that we had watched. And so as we grew, they'd have instead, of course, they didn't have HBO and Cinemax and all those kinds of things. So the regular stations would have like a Sunday or a Saturday or Sunday night movie. And it would be one that had, maybe been out for a year or two. And so it was fairly recent movie and they'd have it on television. And so we would watch those together and discuss them. And so it's like it was sort of in my DNA. And over the years being involved in theater, I realized stories do have a lot of power because if you are putting yourself in the shoes of the characters, you can learn so much.
Oh yeah.
And I think it might have been when I was in high school, or maybe I didn't go to college right away. Maybe I was working. I realized, oh, everything that I've been learning in those that we'd been discussing and I'd been learning about those characters, I can use that in my real life.
Yes.
Oh, oh, that person is yelling at me. Maybe they're not yelling at me. Maybe something happened to them at home. They're just really upset, and they're just taking it out on me.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have to be so upset then.
Exactly.
I can ask them questions. Oh, what you seem really upset. What can I do for you? That kind of thing. So, anyway, yeah, I was using my skills out in my real life. I remember when I was working in a Montessori school, and there was this 3-year-old kid. I was working in a 3-year-old classroom, and I had said something to him, and he was so angry. I could see it on his face, his body
Wow.
language. He was just so angry with me. And I looked at him and I said, it's okay to be angry. You can be angry with me. I'm an adult. I can take it.
Yeah.
And the relief on that kid's face was
Oh.
so amazing. It's like no adult had ever given him permission to be angry with an
Wow.
adult, So that taught me something.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, taught me a lot. So there have been other times in my life where, I say stuff like that and the reaction is just so amazing.
Right.
And it's all because of what I learned from my parents and discussing those stories.
Have you been getting reactions close to that now that you have a podcast and you're interviewing how many episodes? You said you have 80 something already?
Well, the one that you and I did is 84, but unfortunately, that's not even going to air until a year from now.
Yeah.
Podmatch has sent me so many people that I had to hide my host profile because
Yeah, I'm pretty much reaching that limit too. I hear you there.
yeah, for at least for a while. So yeah, I do get great reactions from the people that I interview. I don't get a lot of comments, but I do get likes. I do get people on because I put it on my website, but it also goes out to other outlets as well. The podcast does. But I do get likes, and I've had some comments on Apple Podcasts. I don't pay attention to Spotify and Google. I don't know if I've had any comments from those.
What do you enjoy about podcasting, Lucinda?
Talking to people. I'm curious. I want to know. I want, sometimes I think I scare people because I'll ask them a lot of questions and then they're like, well, they're not used to people asking so many questions. So I've had to learn to be really careful. But podcasters, people who are guests on podcasts, they're like, oh yeah, ask me anything. Right. So that's really nice. But in my private or personal life, sometimes I get too enthusiastic.
Yeah.
and I put people off, especially if, they're not white. And I'm asking them a bunch of questions because I'm curious. I want to know what their life's like,
Sure.
And when I worked in teaching in Douglas, which is a border town, most of the students were of Mexican descent. And so it was great because after a while, they got used to the fact that I wanted to know about their culture. I wanted to know why they were, having this festival or what a quinceañera was, because I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. They said, wow. You don't know what a quinceañera is? I said, well, I grew up next to the Canadian border.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
If you want to ask me about, a potlatch or something, I could tell you about that. But or if you want to know about something from Canada, I could tell you about that. But anyway, so
how did your book came out in 2017? The Space Between Time. I love that. I love that title too. How did that book come about, and what's it about?
Well, the title, you can thank the Beatles for the title.
I love the Beatles.
Yeah. I had no idea what I was going to call it. And I was getting near the end of writing the first draft, and I had no idea what I was going to call it. And I was driving home from teaching and I was listening to the Beatles, and I don't even remember what song, but they were talking about the space and time. And I said, oh, that's the title of my book. So the book is it's a 2-timeline book, which is really popular now, I know. But I do not have my person in the present actually travel back in time. It's just her consciousness that enters her 3 times great grandmother's consciousness. So she lives with her for a little while, and then she can go back home again, and no time has passed at home. Yeah. So it starts off with Jenna in the present. It starts off with her fiance breaking their engagement at like 5 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And so she gets ready and goes to work. And while she's at work, she gets a phone call. She lives in Portland, Oregon, and her mother lives in Roseburg, Oregon, which is in southern Oregon. And she gets a phone call that her mother's been in this really terrible accident and she needs to come right away. So she drives, takes 4 hours, I think, to drive from Portland to Roseburg. And she gets there before her mother dies, but she's brain dead, unfortunately. And so her mother dies, and she has this really great support group there. All her mother's friends are there with her. But her father's already dead. So, she doesn't have any family left, really. I mean, she might have cousins, but they never got together. So pretty much she's alone. And her mother's house is paid for, and so she inherits the house. And then she goes back to work and she loses her job because someone's framed her for embezzlement. And so she three blows all in 1 week. And so she goes back to Roseburg and she's cleaning out her mom's house, going through her mom's stuff, and she finds this box that has never been it's got a lock on it and it's never been opened. It looks, kind of rusty, the lock does. So when she finds the key, she opens it up and it has the journals of her 3 times great grandmother and 1 journal of her 3 times great grandfather. And so, excuse me, I don't know why I'm doing that so much. And so when she opens up the book and the first journal and starts to read it, her consciousness goes into her 3 times great grandmother, whose name is Morgan. And it happens to be the day that Morgan's father's funeral.
Oh, wow.
And she lives in Vermont. She's in her 20s. She's not married. So of course she's an old maid, but she's gone to teacher college and so she could become a teacher. And so she has this offer to go to Oregon to become a teacher. And it's 1859. It's 1859. It's the year that Oregon became a state. So
Wow.
It's California and Oregon are states. And then there's this huge gap between all the other states. But she has an aunt. Her mother's aunt lives in Boston and she's wealthy and she wants Morgan to come and live with her. Well, Morgan doesn't want that. So she has to get the help of her friends so she can escape her aunt, because her aunt's very controlling. And so there's the whole thing of the Oregon Trail. I had to do all this because I'm an Oregon Trail descendant. My mom's family on both sides traveled on the Oregon Trail. And so I had to do all this research about that. That was really fun. But in the meantime, Jenna is trying to deal with this whole being framed for embezzlement issue. And she feels totally deflated because she thought the job that she had was an editor in publishing. She thought that was her calling, and then she lost that job. And so, she's going through all this self-examination. And so when she gets to go live life with Morgan, it kind of helps her. Yeah. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that happens. My friend, who is now dead, unfortunately, Deborah Strait, said, you've got to beat up your character in the middle of the book. And that was a hard thing to do. But so Jenna goes through kind of a lot of hard things. And so does Morgan. So in the end, though, what they both learn is that life doesn't always turn out the way you think that it should, but usually if you're open-hearted and open-minded, it takes you to the place where you are meant to be.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the theme of the book.
That's excellent. So how did you even come up with that story in its entirety?
Well, to tell you the truth, it actually started off many, many years before when my father, my husband and I had gone to visit my parents who we live on the eastern side of Arizona. They lived on the western side of Arizona near the California border. And we drove to see them one weekend. It's a 5-hour drive. And they, my dad, I could tell, was starting to decline. He had heart disease. And it had been 20 years, I think, since his first open heart surgery.
Oh, wow.
And he's my mentor, so as we're driving home for 5 hours, I got this idea about a book about a daughter and how much she loved her father. And that there is that component
Mm.
in the book, but that's not really what it ended up being. You always have an idea. Well, at least I do. I have an idea and then it morphs
Yeah.
into something else. So I think maybe a lot of fiction writers have that happen to them where they get this little nugget of an idea and then it morphs into something
Sure.
else, or it expands into something that they weren't expecting.
Right.
And that's
Well,
kind of what
your
happened.
book sounds like it could definitely be a movie. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, someone else said that to me, and I said, well, I don't know anybody in the film industry, so they'd have to read the book. And I don't think I would want to write the screenplay. I took playwriting in graduate school, but no, that's just not my forte. Somebody else would have to write the screenplay.
Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely tough.
Yeah. Or it could be like because it's pretty long. It could be a like
Series?
short mini series. Yeah. Something
Yeah, it
like that.
sounds like it.
Mhm.
Sounds incredible. So tell us
Yeah.
about your theater background. I actually wrote a play. I co-wrote a play. It was a play about transgenders coming out and what they face in families. And this was probably about the same year your book came out, about 2017. It's been a long time. So I do know what it's like to go from being a regular storyteller, writing, freelance writer, and then all of
Uh-huh.
a sudden have to change your format to like a playwright, which is completely
Mhm.
different. And because
Mhm.
I'm not a playwright, going into that format almost took away, I felt, a lot of my creativity because I was too busy focusing on the format rather than the flow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was just my experience with it. But I mean, what about your theater background? How did that help you out with this?
Well, I started writing it. When I started writing it, I heard all the dialogue first, pretty
Okay.
much. you know, I'm used to dialogue.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, there are authors nowadays that do follow that 3-act format kind of thing
Yeah.
that you have to have for screenwriting. And I didn't really do that, although I once I got the rough draft and I started editing, that was really my favorite part because then I could figure out how to mold it to the plot outline.
Uh-huh.
And that I used to teach about in English. And yeah, I could see where each woman was, what their inciting incident was, and the problems that they went through, and then their climax, and then and how to intertwine
Yeah.
those. I could figure that out. So I'm working on a sequel. There's only going to be one sequel, which I started right after I finished my rough draft. And Morgan in the past gets involved in the suffrage movement. But in 2014, which is when I finished my rough draft, there was nothing going on in the present. And
Mhm.
now that there is, do I include COVID, all this stuff? Jenna gets involved in the current women's movement, but I have sort of stalled on it a little bit because I'm so busy creating a new online course. See, that was another little voice thing. You need to create this online course. And it's like, I'm so busy already. And I just retired and I'm so busy.
Yeah.
But it just came to me a couple of days ago because I've been having difficulty. How do I start this book? Well, so for Jenna, it's going to start when the first woman she and her family are going to the inauguration of the first woman president.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I
So
love it
that's how,
already.
yeah. So it'll be when her daughter, Jenna's daughter, is like 12 or 13 years old.
Okay.
Because the parts that I've written now are right around the time that Trump got elected.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I am mostly there with her timeline. So I'm going to have to fill in the gaps. But Morgan's timeline was easy to write because it's in the past, and I don't know why that's so much easier to write than what's going on in the current times. Probably because we don't really know how we feel about
Right.
what's
Yeah,
happening
exactly.
with us right now. Yeah.
Lucinda, thanks so much for sharing your incredible stories, your book, your podcast. Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, everybody. The book we just talked about, her book is called The Space Between Time. Her podcast is called Story Power Podcast. How can our viewers or watchers and our listeners find your podcast, find your book, and find you if they need to get a hold of you?
Almost everything is on my website, Sage Woman Chronicles, on WordPress at sagewoman.life. And there's the podcast tab, the books. I also have a children's book that my husband and I wrote for our oldest nephew, who is now 40 something. But we used it as our kind of, how do we publish an independently publish a book practice. And then there's also, probably there will be a tab eventually for my course when I get it finished. I think there are also links to my social media, although I haven't looked at my homepage in a long time. And so, yeah, most of the social media has some combination of Sage-Midgorden or Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and that's how they can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And
I'm sorry, what was your website again?
Sage Woman Chronicles at
Sage
sagewoman.life.
Chronicles at
Yeah.
sagewoman.life.
.life. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. I'm certain we're going to keep in touch. Thanks for sharing your love, your light, and your energy. And for those who are tuning in for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Follow us for more information, more stories, more life experiences. And also make sure you tune into my website. That's where you'll find more episodes, past episodes, and our future episodes at www.alittlessfear.com. Thanks so much, everybody. Love you, and we'll keep in touch. I look forward to the next one coming up very soon. Love you all.